Okay, so we were able to run this code and we understood something what is happening behind the scene, right? So basically we know now that as a programmer, as a Java developer, you write our Java code, which will be having .java extension, and that gets compiled by Java C. And then when you compile the code, what you get in output is a bytecode, which will be having .class file. And then you can run the .class file in your JVM. And basically it's a part of JRE, which will have JVM as well as libraries, a lot of classes. And then everything is a part of a JRE. That JRE you'll be installing on OS, right? So basically you need to have a hardware, of course you need a machine to run, right? That machine will be having an OS, and then OS will be having a JRE, which will have JVM. But as a developer, you will need one more tool, which is JDK. Now when you install a new JDK, you get the updated JRE and JVM with it. Okay, so the version of JDK which we are using is JDK 17, which is LTS, which is long-term support. And in every new version, you get some minor extra features, right? So even if you are watching this after 10 years or 8 years or 5 years, you will be having new version of Java. Of course, next 5 years, you will get 10 new versions, and every new version will have minor updates. But the base thing remains same, right? So whatever you are learning is actually from Java 1 itself. The system.out.println is same in Java 1. So don't worry about the new updates. The core concept will remain same. Okay, cool. Now, once you have this thing, what next we can do? Now think about this world. Of course, first of all, why we build software? We build software so that we can solve a problem. Now, what problem we are trying to solve? So basically, we are trying to solve the real world problems with the help of virtual world. Example, you wanted to buy something, so you got Amazon, which delivers everything at home. So you got Amazon as an online service. You wanted to book a cab, you got Uber. So for every problem, we have a solution in the virtual world, right? So banking, everything is happening online. Now, when you say you are replacing the real world with a virtual world solution, so basically we need to work with one thing. The most important thing now is actually data. So basically we want to work with data. So how will you work with data? So basically you need data as well as processing on it. So whenever we build a project or when you build an application, what we are doing is we are doing the processing on data. Now this data can be coming from user or something. So maybe you will accept the data from the user and then you will do some work with it. Maybe you want to store this data. Now, where exactly do we store data? So we store data in something called database. So we have a database here in which you'll be storing your data. So whatever data you're getting from the user or from after processing. So let's say we got a user here, user sends us data, we will apply a processing on that. So we will do some work in between, and then at the end, we might store data in database. Now this database is actually a permanent storage or a persistent storage, which you say. Now when you say it is permanent, that doesn't mean you can't change it. Of course you can replace the values as well, but then the data stays there. Okay, so if you just store it, and even if you shut down your machine, the data will be stored. Example, when you copy movies or games on your laptop, it stays there, right? It will get deleted when you say delete, but the data stays there. So this makes sense, right? But when I say you will receive data from the user and then you will be doing some processing on that, where you will store the data for temporary purpose. Of course, database is there for permanent storage, but during processing, you have to store your data somewhere, and that somewhere is variable. So this is where you store your data. Now, what is variable? So imagine variable as a box, and in this box, you will store your data. Now, what data you want to store? Your data can be numeric, it can be text, it can be image, whatever you want to store. So you can store that data in this variable. Now, I'm not talking specific to Java. In general, when you say you want to store data, you will store that in a box, and that box will have a type to it. It can be of type numbers, it can be of types text or image or video. So here we are trying to store data, right? So let's say I want to store a number which is 5. So this box will have a number 5, and it will also have a name to it. Maybe I can give a name, let's say a number. Doesn't matter what name you give. Of course, there are some restrictions on names, but num works. You can use any name which you like. Maybe you can create one more box here, and you want to store the number itself, but let's say a decimal value, something like 6.5. You can do that. Okay, and maybe you can have a different value to it, different name to it. Maybe you can say marks or grades. Maybe you want to have one more box where you want to store your name. So I can do that. I can store my name as Navin, and it will have a variable name. So maybe I can say this is user. So user is Navin. So basically what you do is you create a box, and inside the box you'll be having values. Now this box are actually called variables. So we can name this box as a variable. Okay, and so what we got till now, we got that a box will be called a variable, and you'll be having a name to it, you'll be having a value. So name and value will be there. Apart from that, Java is actually called strongly typed language. Now what it means is whatever variable you want to create. So if you want to store the data, of course, Java says, hey, we'll accept the data. But tell me also what kind of box you want. A different type of data will require different box. Okay, that makes sense. So I will say, hey, Java, I want to store a number. So I want to create a box for me which will accept numbers. So we can say, okay, this makes sense. Number will go there. We can also treat this as a number, but this is a text, right? So in Java, we call them as a string, right? So text will be having a string. So this box type is string. What about this box? Of course, we say this is a number, this is also a number, but in number as well, we have a category inside it. So one of the category I will mention is this. We can, if you want to store numbers, we can store that in something called int. Now int means integer. Okay, so we can store data in the integer format, but we cannot store 6.5 in int because 6.5 is a real number. So int will accept numbers, but why it is called int? Why not natural numbers or whole numbers? Is because maybe you want to store negative values as well. So remember your maths concept. So we have negative numbers to positive values. So everything will be considered as int. So we can store -5, +5, that's your choice. Okay, so this makes sense. So what I will do now is, if I go back to the code, of course, we want to print hello world, but we have done that. Now I want to store value so that I can do some processing on it. Now what kind of processing I want to do? Maybe I want to add two numbers, maybe 2 + 2 or 5 + 6, simple stuff, right? But before that, we'll see how do we store data. Even if you don't store data, you can just go inside this system.out.print, whatever operation you want to perform. You want to say 3 + 5, that will work. So you can just go back here and say compile and run. So remember this thing, every time you make a change, just make sure that you compile it first. So the first step is compilation and then running. And you can see we got the output, which is 8. Just ignore this percentage symbol as of now. Actually, there's one more thing I wanted to mention. Whenever you print something, let's say I want to print this number here as well. I want to perform different operations. So you can write multiple statements for different operation you want to perform. So you can say 8 + 7. So we are doing addition here and then addition here. Let's clear the screen. Okay, I have to first compile. Okay, that's what. Compile, run, and you can see we got the value. Now the only thing you can see is the result are bit that together, right? We want to give a space of maybe I can print 15 on new line. So what you can do is instead of using print, you can actually use something called println. Now println means print new line. So it will print and it will go on new line. So we can do that here as well. So just say ln at the end, println, which is print new line. And now compile, run, and you can see we got the value. We got 5 and 15. So from now we'll not be using print, we'll be using println. Okay, so again, println means it will print, it will go on new line. So we got println. Now what else we can do here? So I don't want to perform the operation here. Remove that. I want to store that value first. So how do we store? Of course, we need box, right? So I can say num1. As I mentioned, I can use any variable name. So let's say num1, or to start with, let's say num, just to keep it simple. And then we can give a value to it. Let's say value is 3. So remember, we have to mention the variable name and then we have to mention the value for it. And at the end, of course, you can put a semicolon. So we can see we got num equal to 3 and we got a semicolon. So in Java, after every statement, you have to give a semicolon. You might be thinking, hey, why don't we have a semicolon here? It's because that is a block. So we don't put a semicolon out at the end of a block. The reason is it signifies that's the end. Here, if we don't mention semicolon, how do we define that that's the end? So it's good to put semicolon at the end. And anyway, Java will give you error if you don't do that. The next thing we have to do here is we have to also mention the type. What type of num is this? So we can say int. Now you have to say first you have to specify the type and then you mention the variable name. Maybe if you have learned some other languages where you put the type afterwards, in Java we first put the value or put the type and then we put the name, then we assign the value. Now this equal to here is called assignment operator because you are assigning a value. So what it will do is it will take the value from the right hand side, it will assign the value to the left hand side. Okay, remember this. Equal to will take the value from the right hand side, it will assign the value to the left hand side. Okay, so we got a variable which is of type int. Okay, so this is num, which is a variable, and then we can print it now. Let's only print the value, that's it, nothing much. I will just save. Now once you click on save, you have to compile the code and run the code and you can see we got 3. Okay, cool. So now can I create more variables? We can actually. So let me just rename the variable from num to num1, and here as well I will print num1. Okay, and then I will create one more variable which is num2 is equal to. So every time you want to create a variable, just mention the type, which is int, of whatever type of variable you're creating. At this point we are working with numbers, so we'll say int num2 equal to, we can assign the value which is 5. So we got 3 and 5. Here what you can do is you can actually perform the operation here itself. So you can say num1 plus num2, that works. So instead of adding values, we can also add the variables. Okay, so now what we're doing is we are saying num1 plus num2, and the addition will be getting printed. Let's try. So I can just go back here and say compile, run, and you can see we got 8. You know what? Instead of adding it inside this, it's not a good practice. What you can do is we can create another variable called result. And that's right, variables are free to use. Of course, behind the scenes it is consuming a lot of memory, but it's working, right? It's free as of now. But later on we'll focus on how can you make your code more efficient so that it will use less space, right? At this point it works, so we can say num1 plus, so whatever operation you want to perform, you can do that here. And instead of printing and doing addition here, we can simply print result. So what you're doing now is you're adding the value, and then you are storing that in a result, and then you're printing it. It should work. Let's try. Compile, run, and you can see we got 8. So this is working. So that's how you can create variables. So remember this thing, every time you want to create a variable, you first need a name for it. At this point is num1. You have to also mention the type of it. At this point this is int, and you have to assign the value for it. In the upcoming videos we'll talk about how can you create a variable which will be having a name with a different type and different value. Okay, so that's it from this video.